On May 27, 2015, guests of one of Zurich's most expensive hotels woke up to a sound that didn't belong there. Not room service, not housekeeping. Police, moving floor to floor, knocking on doors that had never been knocked on before, not by anyone with this kind of authority. By the time the sun was fully up, several of the most powerful men in world football were being escorted out of the Beau-Lac Hotel and into unmarked cars. Presidents of football federations, a FIFA vice president, men who, between them, shaped the fate of a sport watched by half the planet. By lunchtime, the US Department of Justice had unsealed a 164-page indictment. 14 people charged, decades of alleged bribery, more than $150 million on the table. And at the center of all of it, quietly, almost invisibly, was a man who hadn't set foot in a FIFA boardroom in years. A man the FBI had turned 4 years earlier. His name was Chuck Blazer. And by the time the world learned what he'd done, he was already dying. To understand why this raid mattered, you need to understand what FIFA actually was. Not just a sports organization, an empire.
FIFA World Cup, ladies and gentlemen, will be organized in Russia. 22 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
It governed the most popular sport on the planet, watched in some form by more people than almost any other recurring event in human history. The World Cup alone generated billions in broadcast rights, sponsorships, and licensing. And hosting it wasn't just about football. A World Cup could rebrand an entire country on the world stage overnight, which meant the right to host one wasn't just prestigious, it was valuable, extraordinarily valuable. For decades, rumors of vote buying, kickbacks, and backroom deals had followed FIFA's executive committee like a shadow. Journalists investigated. Whistleblowers occasionally spoke up. And every time, the story seemed to evaporate. FIFA was too large, too wealthy, too globally entangled for any single country's law enforcement to actually reach. Until one country found a way in, not through football at all. Through taxes. His name was Chuck Blazer. For over 2 decades, he served as General Secretary of CONCACAF, the governing body for football across North and Central America and the Caribbean, and sat on FIFA's powerful executive committee. He did not look like a man with secrets. He looked like a man enjoying the spoils of success, spectacularly so. Blazer kept 2 apartments in Trump Tower in Manhattan, one for himself and a separate one, reportedly costing thousands of dollars a month for his cats. Within football circles, he'd earned a nickname that said, "Everything, Mr. 10%, a reference prosecutors would later allege to the commissions he took on deals that passed through his hands. For years, that lifestyle seemed bulletproof. Then, in 2011, Blazer was stopped on a Manhattan street by federal agents, not football investigators, the FBI and the IRS. He hadn't filed a tax return in years, on an income that, by some estimates, ran into the tens of millions. That was not a small problem. Blazer had a choice: face decades of exposure alone, or start talking. He started talking. In late 2011, Chuck Blazer quietly became a cooperating witness for the FBI. What followed reads less like a financial crimes case, and more like an espionage operation. Blazer began wearing recording devices into meetings, some reportedly disguised inside everyday objects he carried with him: dinners, hotel rooms, casual conversations between old friends in football's inner circle. For years, some of the most powerful men in the sport spoke freely in front of a man who was, by then, working for the United States government. He pleaded guilty in November 2013 to racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, and years of tax evasion. He agreed to forfeit nearly $2 million. But here's the part that mattered most. That plea was sealed, kept secret. For almost 2 more years, Chuck Blazer continued operating, at least on paper, as a free man, while federal prosecutors quietly built a case around everything he'd handed them. The clock toward Zurich had already started. Nobody else in football knew it yet.
As part of our long-running investigation into bribery and corruption in the world of organized soccer.
What investigators found, once they started pulling threads, wasn't a single bribe. It wasn't one official making one bad decision. It was a system. According to the indictment, football executives across multiple continents had allegedly accepted bribes and kickbacks tied to media rights, sponsorship contracts, and, most explosively, votes. Votes for tournament hosting rights, votes for confederation presidencies, votes that, on paper, represented the will of football associations around the world. Jack Warner, the former FIFA vice president from Trinidad and Tobago, was accused of soliciting $10 million in exchange for support of South Africa's bid to host the 2010 World Cup. The money moved through an almost absurd maze: shell companies, offshore accounts, wire transfers routed through multiple countries before landing anywhere close to a name a journalist could recognize. Every account investigators opened led to another account. Every company was a shell hiding another shell. This wasn't corruption happening around football. This was football functioning as the cover story for something else entirely. That question haunted football fans everywhere. How deep did this really go? Was corruption limited to a handful of officials, or had it become part of the institution itself? Investigators examined World Cup bidding processes, marketing contracts, television rights, regional football confederations, internal elections. Every new revelation raised new questions. Public trust collapsed. Sponsors grew nervous. Politicians demanded answers. For the first time in modern history, people openly wondered whether FIFA could survive.
Here we go, Sepp.
Even FIFA president Sepp Blatter could not escape the storm. For years, Blatter had been one of the most powerful figures in global sports. He survived challenge after challenge. Yet the corruption crisis eventually consumed his presidency. Under mounting pressure, he announced his resignation. The man who had ruled FIFA for nearly 2 decades was gone. An era had ended. Not because of a football match, not because of a vote, but because investigators had followed the money. Chuck Blazer never saw most of this play out. By the time the Zurich raid made headlines, he was already seriously ill. FIFA issued him a lifetime ban in July 2015, by then mostly a formality. He died 2 years later, in July 2017, after a long battle with cancer. He was 72. He never testified in open court against the men he'd recorded. He never needed to. The recordings, the documents, the years of quiet cooperation, those had already done their work, brick by brick, long before his death made headlines of its own. FIFA survived. The World Cup survived. New leadership, new reforms, new promises followed. But something else didn't survive intact. The assumption that an organization this large, this wealthy, this woven into the world's biggest stage, was simply too big to ever really be investigated. It wasn't corruption that brought it down in the end. It was a man with unpaid taxes, a recording device, and nothing left to lose.
Please bring the 4th cup to Argentina in the Mundial. אתה תומך.